On March 21, 2025, the world was stunned by the sudden news of George Foreman's passing at the age of 76, a living legend revered not just for his remarkable boxing career, but also for his transformation into a household name with his famous grill. Foreman had left a legacy that few could match. His impact was felt in and outside of the ring, making him an icon in the hearts of millions. But with his death came a question that shook the world. What happens to the fortune he built? How would his family cope with the inheritance of such a colossal empire? And more importantly, what was hidden behind the legacy of a man who seemed to have it all? The media quickly turned its attention to his family, as rumors swirled about their personal struggles, their relationship with the boxing great, and the secrets that might now come to light. The world watched closely, wondering how this extraordinary man's passing would impact those closest to him. The Foreman family wasn't just dealing with the loss of a father, grandfather, and husband. They were now facing the massive responsibility of his estate, the divisions that arose, and the emotional weight of the fortune George left behind. A fortune that might tear them apart, rather than bring them together. What would you do if you suddenly found yourself in the middle of a multi-million-dollar inheritance, with family drama and long-hidden secrets surfacing? The story of George Foreman's family is just beginning, and it's a ride you don't want to miss. Before we dive deeper into this emotional and gripping journey, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the rest of this intense and moving story. Stay tuned as we uncover what truly happened behind closed doors. George Foreman's journey to legendary status didn't start in a glamorous ring or with the fame he would later enjoy. It began in the rough neighborhoods of Marshall, Texas, where he was born on January 10, 1949, the son of a hard-working but struggling family. Raised in a home where food was scarce and dreams were often pushed aside in favor of survival, George learned early on that nothing came easy. As a child, George was known for his rebellious nature and temper. He had little direction in life and often found himself in trouble with the law. His mother, who saw the potential in him despite his struggles, pushed George to channel his energy into something more productive. At the age of 15, George joined a local boxing program through the Job Corps, and it was here that his life took a pivotal turn. In the ring, George found something he had never experienced before: control. His trainer, Dick Sadler, helped mold him into a powerhouse, and by the time he was in his early 20s, George had made a name for himself in the boxing world. He would go on to become the youngest boxer in history to win the heavyweight title at 24, a record that stood for decades. But George's path wasn't without hardship. His early success came with a price. He struggled with the pressures of fame, and in many ways, boxing consumed him. Yet it was also boxing that gave him a new sense of purpose. After a devastating loss to Muhammad Ali in 1974, George's life took a dramatic turn. Having hit rock bottom, he walked away from the sport for a time, turning to religion and finding solace in a new purpose, spreading the message of faith. This spiritual awakening would not only change the course of his life, but it also led to his return to the ring in the 1990s, where he famously became the oldest heavyweight champion in history at the age of 45. During his time away from boxing, George also began to build a family, marrying several times and having children, some of whom he would later bring into his boxing journey. His relationships were complicated, and the family dynamic he built was often filled with both love and tension. Despite his tough exterior, George loved deeply and felt deeply, especially when it came to his children. His public persona was that of a larger-than-life figure, a champion in and out of the ring. Yet, behind closed doors, he faced many personal battles. Divorce, fatherhood, and maintaining a balance between his faith, family, and career weighed heavily on him. He was often criticized for being distant, but his children would later speak of him as a loving, albeit tough, father who demanded the best from them. As George's fame grew, so did his financial success. In 1994, the George Foreman grill changed the trajectory of his life. The product became a household name, propelling him into an entirely new realm of wealth and influence. However, with wealth came complications. The Foreman family expanded, with George having a total of 12 children from various marriages, and his fortune grew more complex. He was determined to set up a legacy that would outlast his time on Earth, but would his family be able to carry that legacy forward? In this chapter, we see George as not just a champion in the ring, but a man who overcame adversity, learned the value of faith, and worked tirelessly to provide for his family. His journey was one of ups and downs, but one constant remained: the deep love and commitment he felt for those closest to him. But as we'll soon see, the questions surrounding his passing aren't just about his legacy as a boxer or businessman. The real story lies in how his family would handle the vast fortune he left behind, and how, despite all of George's accomplishments, family secrets and unspoken tensions were about to come to light. What kind of legacy do you think George Foreman truly left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And stay with us as we continue this emotional journey into the heart of the Foreman family saga. The news of George Foreman's sudden passing sent shockwaves across the globe, but for his family, the storm was just beginning. His fortune, which spanned across boxing, endorsements, and the lucrative George Foreman grill, was enormous. Yet with such wealth came complications that none of them were prepared for. The question wasn't just about who would inherit what. It was about the legacy of a man who had lived a complicated life, leaving behind not just assets, but unresolved tensions. At the heart of the storm was George's relationship with his children. With 12 kids from various marriages, the potential for conflict was vast. Some of his children had followed in his footsteps, others had distanced themselves, seeking lives outside the public eye. But now, with their father gone, all of them would have to come together, or so they thought. As the executor of his estate, George's eldest son, George Jr., felt the weight of responsibility. He had been his father's closest confidant and business partner, taking on the challenge of managing the George Foreman grill empire after George's boxing career ended. But with this new responsibility came pressure. George Jr. had a plan in mind, but not everyone agreed with him. "There's no way I'm letting you control everything," spoke George's second son, Michael, who had always had a strained relationship with his father. Michael had chosen a different path in life and often felt overshadowed by George's larger-than-life presence. To him, the idea of a single person controlling the fortune didn't sit well, especially considering how distant he had felt from his father during his formative years. The tension wasn't just between the brothers. His daughters, including his youngest, Nadia, and his oldest, Frida, also felt the pressure of their father's estate. They had each had different relationships with their father. Some felt that their father had prioritized his career and public image over their well-being, while others remembered a father who had always provided for them, but struggled with being emotionally available. Frida, who had followed in her father's footsteps as a fighter herself, was particularly hurt. She felt both a sense of pride in his legacy and resentment over the way he had kept his emotional distance. She wondered how much of that legacy was really his, and how much was the product of a media machine that had turned him into a hero for the world, but never truly understood the man behind the title. The will, which had been written years earlier, contained provisions that left the family stunned. George had designated George Jr. as the primary executor of his estate, but he had also set up trust funds for each of his children, ensuring that they would all receive a fair share. Yet, the will wasn't as simple as it seemed. In a series of documents found after his passing, George had written down specific wishes about how his wealth should be used, something that none of his children had expected. A portion of his fortune was to go toward supporting underprivileged youth in his hometown of Marshall, Texas. Another portion was to fund boxing training facilities for young athletes. But perhaps the most unexpected part was a request for a specific sum of money to be donated to the church that had helped him find faith. "I never knew about that," Michael said in disbelief when the will was read aloud. "Why didn't he tell us about this? He never said a word about it. Why this church?" The emotions in the room were raw, and as the truth about George's final wishes began to unfold, the family began to fracture even further. George Jr. tried to keep everyone focused on what was best for the legacy, but his role as executor only intensified the tension. He understood the gravity of the situation and knew that in order to fulfill his father's wishes, he would have to confront the issues that had always simmered beneath the surface. But the family was divided. Some felt that George's decision to leave a significant portion of his wealth to the church was a betrayal. Others couldn't understand why certain children had been favored in the will, leaving them feeling overlooked. For some, it was about more than money. It was about seeking approval, acknowledgement, and a sense of justice for the years they had spent trying to get their father's attention. It wasn't just the will that divided them. It was everything George had left behind. The fame, the fortune, the grills, the investments, the legacy. Each child saw it through their own lens. As more family members gathered to deal with the fallout of George's death, the question was no longer just about money. It was about control. Who would ultimately decide how the legacy would be carried forward? Who was best suited to take on the mantle of George Foreman? But there was one more twist, one final piece of the puzzle that none of the family expected. An unknown attorney arrived at the reading of the will, holding documents that would change everything. What do you think is hidden in the documents that could shake up the Foreman family's world? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to stay with us for the next chapter, where the real twists and turns begin to unfold. The room fell silent as the attorney slowly opened the sealed envelope, his hands trembling just slightly. George's family, already on edge from the revelations of the will, exchanged anxious glances. Everyone was waiting for the next bombshell. Whatever it was, it would change the trajectory of everything. As the lawyer began reading the document, the tension was palpable. This is a codicil to George Foreman's last will and testament, dated just 6 months before his passing, he began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of what was to come. The family members leaned in closer, the air thick with anticipation. The codicil had not been mentioned in the will's initial reading. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. In the event of my passing, I have designated a second executor for my estate, someone who is not directly involved in the family business. This person will be responsible for managing the assets that are to be allocated to charity. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. The family had already been reeling from the previous contents of the will, and now this. The name that followed was one none of them had expected. Vera Cole, the lawyer announced. Vera Cole. George Foreman's longtime business partner and, unknown to the family, a close confidant who had been working behind the scenes for years, managing much of George's investments, the grill empire, and various charitable projects. While George had always been open about his business ventures, he had kept Vera's role largely a secret. None of the children knew just how integral she had been to his financial and philanthropic efforts. George Jr.'s face reddened as he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Wait, what? This is a joke. She's not family. Why is she being put in charge of such a huge portion of Dad's estate? Frida, who had remained quiet until now, stood up next, her voice trembling with emotion. Why didn't he ever tell us about her? What was her role? If he trusted her, why didn't we ever get the chance to know her? The tension in the room soared to a breaking point. The children, already divided over the initial contents of the will, were now left reeling at this unexpected revelation. Vera Cole, a name that most of them had never even heard of, was suddenly in charge of overseeing significant parts of George's fortune, including portions meant for the church and charity initiatives that had been close to George's heart. She's been in charge of his business decisions for years, the lawyer continued, and she holds legal rights to the future of the grill brand, as well as overseeing the charitable foundations George supported. The shock was enough to paralyze the room. George Jr., typically composed and determined, now appeared unsure of how to react. His mind raced. He had always assumed he would take the reins completely. The grill brand had made his father a fortune, and it had been George Jr. who had helped build it up alongside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his father had kept too many secrets from him, and it cut deeper than he cared to admit. How could he do this? George Jr. muttered under his breath. All these years I've been working with him side by side, and now I'm just left out. Michael, who had always felt like the outsider in the family, seized the moment. Maybe Dad knew we were all too divided, he said, his tone sharp. Maybe he thought Vera would do a better job than any of us could. Or maybe he didn't want us to tear each other apart over money and power. The family was in turmoil. The realization that Vera Cole, not one of his children, would have a say in the future of George's empire was a bitter pill to swallow. Each of them, had been working under the assumption that they would be the ones to take charge of their father's legacy. But the truth was, George had spent years planning for the future, planning for the possibility that his children, caught up in their own conflicts, would be unable to handle the weight of his legacy. In the days that followed, the family attempted to reach out to Vera, but she remained quiet, her legal team maintaining a tight grip on communication. Some of George's children tried to contest the will, questioning the legitimacy of this second codicil, but the documentation was airtight. George had taken steps to ensure that Vera's role was beyond dispute. As tensions escalated, George Jr. found himself at a crossroads. He had always seen himself as his father's successor, the one who would continue his work, protect his family's name, and carry on the legacy. But with Vera's unexpected influence, his sense of entitlement was now in question. And, with his father's passing, George Jr. was beginning to realize that the role of protector of the Foreman family empire might not be his after all. The media, of course, had a field day with the news. Headlines screamed about family drama, hidden secrets, and the mysterious business partner who was now at the center of it all. George Foreman's death unleashes family feud over multi-million-dollar fortune. One headline read, "It wasn't just the family that was caught in this web of tension." Fans who had long admired George Foreman's story of redemption were now watching the unraveling of the legend they thought they knew. Was this really the legacy he wanted to leave behind? Or had he, like so many before him, been forced to face the reality that legacy and family don't always align in the ways we expect? What do you think of George's decision to put Vera Cole in charge? Would you have made the same choice? Share your thoughts with us below, and don't miss the next chapter where the fallout from this revelation continues to spiral out of control. Stay tuned. The revelation that Vera Cole was not only a key figure in George Foreman's business empire, but also now in charge of major portions of his estate, caused an emotional earthquake within the family. The family's pain wasn't just about financial disagreements or professional decisions. It was about the feeling of betrayal, of being left in the dark for so long about someone who had become so important in George's life. The days following the reading of the will were filled with heated arguments and emotional confrontations. Each family member, already grappling with the loss of their father, now had to contend with the devastating reality that they had been excluded from a vital part of his world. George Jr., whose pride had always been tied to his legacy, found himself questioning everything about his relationship with his father. "I don't understand," George Jr. muttered to himself one night, staring at a photograph of his father in his office. "Why didn't he trust us enough to include us in this? Why Vera? Why her, of all people?" His frustration was palpable. He had spent so many years by his father's side, managing the George Foreman grill empire, thinking that one day he would step into his father's shoes. But now his father's vision for the future had been dramatically altered. Vera's cold efficiency and sharp business mind were the exact opposite of the warm, family-driven atmosphere George Jr. had tried to build. To him, it felt like his father had been trying to protect them from something that they didn't understand. Meanwhile, Frida, who had always fought to make her own name in the boxing world, found herself grappling with the idea that her father's trust had been placed elsewhere. She had always sought his approval, but it had always felt like a distant dream. Now, with Vera pulling the strings behind the scenes, Frida felt invisible. She had lived her life in her father's shadow, trying to prove herself, but had she ever truly been seen? Frida and George Jr. met one evening, after several tense days of family meetings that only seemed to push them further apart. "I don't know what to feel anymore," Frida said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of silent frustration. "Dad was never perfect. He never knew how to really be there for us, but now I just feel like everything was a lie." George Jr. met her gaze. He understood her pain. He had lived with a similar emptiness. But his pain was different. It wasn't just about love or approval. It was about the empire, the control that was slipping through his fingers. "I keep thinking about all the time we spent together, all the work we did. It's like none of it mattered." And then Vera shows up, like she's the one who was always there. His voice cracked as he fought to suppress the anger swelling inside him. As Frida and George Jr. talked, they realized something. Despite their pain, they weren't alone in feeling betrayed. The rest of the family was struggling too, each of them dealing with their own complex emotions about their father's final decisions. But amidst the emotional chaos, something else began to emerge, the lingering doubt that George's actions hadn't been entirely about business. Maybe he had known that his family wasn't ready to carry the weight of his legacy, and maybe Vera had always been there to protect it. The emotional climax hit when the family gathered for a final meeting with Vera. She had agreed to meet with them in person, but tensions were high and no one knew what to expect. George Jr., Frida, Michael, and the rest of the family entered the room, their faces a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. The air was thick with anticipation. Vera sat calmly, her face unreadable, and for a moment the room was silent. Finally, George Jr. spoke. "Vera, why didn't you tell us about all of this? Why didn't Dad trust us enough to handle it?" Vera's eyes flickered for just a moment, but she remained composed. "Your father knew his time was limited," she began. "He trusted you all, but he also knew how much pressure this estate would bring. The grill business, the foundation, the charities, it's all part of a much bigger picture. He didn't want any of you to feel burdened, and he didn't want any of you to fight over his legacy." The room went quiet. George Jr. opened his mouth to respond, but found that words failed him. What Vera said made sense in a way, but it didn't ease the sting of exclusion. Frida spoke up, her voice full of emotion. "But we're his children. We should have been part of that decision, part of the family legacy. We deserve to be more than just side players." Vera's expression softened for the first time. "I understand your feelings, but your father made his choices because he wanted what was best for all of you. His love for you didn't change because he made different decisions." There was a moment of silence, as each family member processed Vera's words. It was clear now that George had been trying to protect them from something, perhaps even from themselves. He had built an empire, but in the end, the legacy was never just about the fortune. It was about ensuring that his family, despite their flaws, would survive the storm that was about to come. Then, the unexpected happened. Vera stood up and placed a manila envelope on the table in front of George Jr. and, "Frida, this," she said quietly, "is for all of you. It's a letter from your father." With trembling hands, George Jr. opened the envelope and began reading aloud the letter George Foreman had left for his children. It wasn't just a farewell message, it was a plea, a final act of love. In it, George confessed his struggles, his regrets, and his hopes for the family. "I know I wasn't always the father you wanted me to be," the letter read, "but I hope you understand that everything I did out of love. Love for you all, and love for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. I trust you each to find your way to make your own peace with the path ahead, and I hope that in the end you'll remember that family above all is what truly matters." The letter left everyone in tears. It was a raw, vulnerable moment that allowed the family to see George not just as a legend, but as a man who had struggled with the same uncertainties, fears, and regrets that they now faced. What do you think? George's final letter really meant for his family. Do you think his children will be able to move forward and rebuild? Share your thoughts with us below and don't miss the next chapter, where the Foreman family will begin to heal, or unravel even further. Stay tuned. The room was thick with emotion after reading George Foreman's final letter. The words on the paper were heavy, but they were also a bridge, offering a glimpse of the man George had been behind the boxer and the businessman. His children, once bitterly divided, now found themselves united in a shared grief that wasn't just about the inheritance, but about their father's love, struggles, and human flaws. As the family sat in silence, letting the letter sink in, Vera Cole stood up. She had been a quiet presence in the room watching them, knowing how much this moment would mean to them. But now, it was time to take action. "I know this isn't easy for any of you," Vera began, her voice softer than it had been before. "I've been with George for many years, and I've seen the complexity of his life, how torn he was between his family and his legacy. He trusted me to ensure that his wishes were carried out, But the heart of the matter was always you, his children. That's what he wanted. Your success, your happiness, and your ability to carry his legacy in a way that honored who he truly was. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The anger and resentment that had clouded their thoughts started to fade, replaced by something more profound, understanding. George had made choices, difficult ones, but ultimately, they were his to make. And in the end, his choice had been driven by his love for them, even if that love hadn't always been expressed in ways they expected. George Jr. was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive him for keeping all of this from us, but I understand now, I get it. He wasn't trying to keep us out of the picture. He was trying to protect us." Frida nodded, her voice quieter now, less angry. "He never knew how to show us everything he was doing. He always did things his way, but he did care. I just wish I could have been more involved in his world." Michael, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "It feels like we've all been waiting for something from him that we'll never get. But this letter, it gives me some peace. It makes me feel like I wasn't just a mistake in his eyes. I always wondered if I mattered to him, and now I know." The family members exchanged looks of mutual understanding, and for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of unity. The pain of loss hadn't disappeared, but it had been tempered by a new understanding of who their father had been, a man who had done the best he could, with the knowledge and tools he had at his disposal. It was clear that the Foreman children had some healing to do, but they were no longer simply focused on the divisions of the past. They now had a shared mission, to preserve their father's legacy in a way that honored both his accomplishments and his vulnerabilities. The question of who would control the fortune and business had, in a way, become secondary to the greater truth. George had never wanted his wealth to be the source of conflict. He wanted his family to thrive, to learn from his mistakes, and to carry forward the lessons he had taught them through his actions, even if he had been unable to say it directly. In the following days, the family gathered again with Vera, now ready to discuss the future of George Foreman's estate and his legacy. There were no more angry outbursts, no more accusations. There was only a deep commitment to honor the man who had shaped their lives in both visible and invisible ways. George, Jr. and Frida, who had once felt so much resentment, now found themselves working together in a way they never had before. Michael, too, began to step into his own, using the lessons from his father's life to move forward with his own business ventures. Together they made a pact, not just to honor their father's legacy, but to do it with integrity, compassion, and unity. They knew that the journey wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to make it work for themselves and for their father. Vera, too, found her role evolving. She had never expected to be part of the family's emotional healing process, but now, with their permission, she could finally help them transition from George's business empire to a new chapter, one where they worked together to ensure that his charitable causes and the grill brand thrived. She was no longer just a business partner. She was now part of their collective effort to protect and grow the legacy that George had built. The Foreman family began to move forward, slowly at first, but with a shared sense of purpose. The wealth, the business, and the fame would always be a part of their lives. But they began to realize that the true legacy wasn't in the money. It was in the love, the lessons, and the memories George had left behind. The storm that had once seemed so insurmountable began to settle. George's children learned that family wasn't just about inheritance. It was about the bond they shared, the journey they would take together, and the hope they carried forward. As time passed, the Foreman family became stronger, united not just by the fortune George had left behind, but by the emotional reconciliation they had found in each other. The love and support they had so longed for from their father had been there all along, even in the most unexpected ways. And in the end, George Foreman's legacy was not just about the wealth he created, but about the healing, the growth, and the love he had finally given to his family. What do you think about the Foreman family's decision to move forward and heal together? Do you believe they'll be able to preserve their father's legacy in the way he hoped? Share your thoughts with us below. Thanks for reading this emotional journey with us. and stay tuned for more stories of love, loss, and the legacies we leave behind. As the Foreman family began to rebuild, a sense of calm started to settle over their once chaotic lives. The pain of George Foreman's passing was still fresh, but the family, now united in purpose, was learning how to move forward. The emotional healing was not a quick fix, but a journey that required patience, forgiveness, and, most importantly, understanding. With the business now firmly in their hands, George Jr. and Frida took on new leadership roles. The grill brand that had made George a household name became a symbol not just of his success, but of the family's resilience. What had once been a symbol of corporate power was now a living testament to the power of family, hard work, and reconciliation. Vera, too, found herself in a new position. Initially brought into George's world for business reasons, she had now become something of a bridge, someone who helped the Foreman children navigate the complexities of the estate and business world. She had been a constant presence in George's life, but now her role was evolving. Vera was becoming more than just a business partner. She was a friend, a confidant, and, in some ways, a guardian of George's vision for the family. One of the most important lessons that the family learned in this time of reflection was the importance of communication. For years, George's silence had been deafening. His failure to open up about his decisions had caused rifts in the family, but now, through shared conversations and open dialogue, the Foreman children were learning to trust each other. They were finding ways to honor their father's legacy, while also making sure their own voices were heard. The first step toward a new beginning came when George Jr. and Frida, along with Vera, announced a new initiative, a foundation to continue the charitable work George had started. The George Foreman Foundation was born not just out of respect for their father's memory, but out of a desire to make a lasting difference in the world. George had always been passionate about giving back, and now his children were determined to carry that torch. In a public statement, George Jr. said, "We are here today because of our father's incredible work and the love he gave us, even when we couldn't fully understand it. This foundation will serve as a legacy of his love and his commitment to making the world a better place. We're excited to continue his mission, one that we believe will change lives for generations to come." Frida, who had spent much of her life trying to prove herself, now found herself speaking to a crowd about the future. With the support of her family, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. "This foundation represents a new chapter for us," she told the crowd. "We're no longer just children of a legend. We're individuals, driven by our own passions and goals, but still united in the love our father instilled in us." It was a turning point for the family. No longer did they view themselves through the lens of inheritance or past grievances. They were looking ahead at what they could build, not just for themselves but for others. And that, they knew, was the truest form of honoring George Foreman's legacy. But the journey didn't end with the announcement of the foundation. It was just the beginning. The family knew they had much to learn, many challenges to overcome, and a long road ahead. But with the newfound bond they had forged, they were ready to face whatever came next. Now that the Foreman family has come together and found a new purpose, what do you think their future holds? How do you think they will continue to honor George's legacy? We want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, legacy, and the enduring power of love. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and stay tuned for more stories of redemption, growth, and the bonds that hold us together. Despite the newfound unity among the Foreman family, the path ahead was not without its challenges. Building the George Foreman Foundation was a noble goal, but it wasn't going to be easy. The pressure of running a foundation, managing the grill empire, and trying to maintain peace within the family became overwhelming at times. George Jr. and Frida, both stepping into roles of leadership, quickly realized that leading a legacy was no small task. While they had the business acumen to run the brand, they didn't have all the answers when it came to emotional leadership. The wounds of the past had not healed entirely, and there were still moments of doubt, especially when it came to navigating the expectations their father had set before his death. Vera, who had once been a quiet business partner, found herself becoming more and more involved in the day-to-day operations of the foundation. Although she had long been a trusted confidant of George, her relationship with the Foreman children was still evolving. At times they resented her presence, as she had been the one closest to their father in his final years. Despite their frustrations, they knew they couldn't do it without her. She was still a steady hand in an otherwise turbulent sea, but the constant tension weighed on everyone. The first major challenge came in the form of a public controversy. The Foreman grill, one of the most popular kitchen products in the world, had been facing new competition from rival companies that were offering similar products with advanced features. Some critics accused the Foreman family of losing touch with the consumer market, pointing out that they hadn't made significant updates to the grill in years. George Jr., who had spent much of his life managing the grill brand, was now faced with the pressure of innovation. He knew how important the brand was to his father's legacy, but he wasn't sure how to reinvent it without risking the essence of what George had built. Meanwhile, Frida, with her background in boxing, was struggling to balance her own ambitions with her responsibilities to the family business. She had always been her father's daughter, but now she wanted to step into her own light, away from the shadows of his legend. As the media scrutiny grew, so did the tension within the family. Late one evening, after a particularly intense business meeting, George Jr. and Frida found themselves in a heated argument. Their frustrations boiled over, and the conversation quickly escalated into accusations of betrayal. "I didn't sign up to be a puppet in Dad's legacy," Frida snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "I spent my whole life fighting for my own identity, but now all of a sudden it's like none of that matters. Everything is about the grill, about this empire, and I'm losing myself in it." George Jr. shook his head, frustration written all over his face. "You think I don't feel that pressure too? I've been trying to hold this family together, trying to do right by Dad's legacy. But it's not just about what we want. We have a responsibility to the people who've built their lives around this brand. The foundation, the business, it's bigger than just us." The argument continued late into the night, with both siblings feeling like they were being pulled in different directions. They were no longer just grieving children. They were business partners, trying to navigate a world they had never expected to inherit. They both wanted the same thing, to honor their father, but they were beginning to realize that doing so would take more than just working together. It would take sacrifice, understanding, and most importantly, compromise. In the days that followed, Vera took it upon herself to intervene. She called both George Jr. and Frida to her office for a private meeting. Sitting them down, she listened carefully to their concerns, offering her perspective as someone who had been part of George's life for so many years. "I know it's hard," Vera said gently, "but you both need to remember that George believed in you, each of you. He saw things in you that you may not see in yourselves right now. He knew you could carry this legacy, but it was never meant to be easy. It's a burden, yes, but it's also an incredible opportunity, and you don't have to do it alone." Her words struck a chord. After a long pause, George Jr. was the first to speak. "I've been so focused on keeping everything running smoothly that I've forgotten what Dad wanted for us. He didn't want us to be trapped in his shadow. He wanted us to be our own people." Frida nodded, wiping away a tear. "I've been so angry at him for not letting me in more, but I think he was trying to protect me. Maybe I've been so busy proving myself that I forgot to honor him too." In that moment, the siblings shared a quiet understanding. They had spent so much time in conflict with each other and their father's memory, but now they were beginning to see that the legacy George had left behind wasn't just about the money or the grill. It was about growth, self-discovery, and supporting one another, even when it seemed impossible. The conversation marked a turning point. Though the challenges were far from over, George Jr. and Frida realized they didn't have to face them alone. They were a family, bound together by love, legacy, and the shared goal of honoring their father's memory in the best way possible. What do you think the Foreman family will do next to overcome these new challenges? How do you think they'll manage the pressures of balancing their individual dreams with the legacy of their father? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to stay tuned for the next chapter in this emotional family saga. The weeks that followed the heated argument between George Jr. and Frida were some of the most difficult, yet transformative, for the Foreman family. They had faced their differences head-on, confronting the painful truth that the weight of their father's legacy was something they would always carry. But now, with newfound clarity, they realized that this weight could either pull them under or push them towards something greater. The rift between the siblings began to heal, but it wasn't immediate. There were still lingering doubts and fears, but what had changed was their willingness to listen to each other, to recognize that their individual dreams could coexist alongside their shared family mission. They weren't just George Foreman's children. They were individuals with their own voices, and together they could create something that honored both their past and their future. It all started with a decision. After weeks of intense meetings, business discussions, and family therapy, George Jr. and Frida agreed to take a bold step. They would restructure the Foreman Grill brand. It wasn't just about creating a new product. It was about rethinking their entire approach to the market. They wanted the grill to represent more than just a cooking appliance. They wanted it to symbolize family, togetherness, and the lessons George had imparted to them throughout their lives. They called in Vera for a meeting. She had been the anchor throughout all of this, and now they needed her expertise more than ever. "I think we're ready to take the grill to the next level," George Jr. said. "But this time we want to do it differently. We don't want just to sell a product. We want to create a movement. A movement around healthy living, family bonding, and everything Dad stood for." Vera smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she replied. "Your father always believed that the grill was more than just a kitchen tool. It was a way to bring families together, to give them a healthy option while enjoying the simple moments of life. This is exactly the kind of reinvention he would have wanted." Frida nodded, her passion evident. "We've always been focused on the grill as a product, but we need to remember that it's about more than just the appliance. It's about a lifestyle, and we want to make sure the new brand reflects that." With Vera's guidance, the Foreman family set out to rebrand the grill, not as just a tool for cooking, but as a symbol of healthy living and family connection. They introduced a series of cooking classes and workshops aimed at educating families on the importance of nutrition and healthy eating. The grill would no longer be just a product. It would become a platform for bringing families together over home-cooked meals. But the work didn't stop there. George Jr. and Frida, still managing the grill brand, also focused their efforts on the George Foreman Foundation, which was growing rapidly. With the momentum from their new rebranding initiative, they expanded the foundation's outreach, focusing on children's health programs, educational scholarships, and youth empowerment initiatives. George's name was now synonymous with more than just boxing and grills. It was becoming a beacon for hope and opportunity. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, financial hurdles, and moments of doubt, but the Foreman family pressed on. Each new initiative brought them closer together, as they learned how to merge their personal goals with their father's vision. The dynamic between George Jr., Frida, and Vera had evolved into a true partnership. They now saw the value in each other's strengths, knowing that their combined efforts were what would push the family and the business forward. One particularly pivotal moment came when George Jr. received a letter from one of the first recipients of the Foundation's scholarships. The letter was filled with gratitude, detailing how the scholarship had changed the young person's life. It was a powerful reminder of the impact George's legacy was having, not just on his family, but on the world. For the first time since their father's death, the Foreman children felt that they were truly living out his legacy, not just in the money, not just in the products, but in the lives they were changing. It was a humbling, emotional experience, one that made them realize the full scope of their father's impact. George had never been just a boxer or a businessman. He had been a father, a mentor, and a source of strength for countless individuals, including his own children. The shift in mindset wasn't just about the business, it was about the family as a whole. They were no longer focused on what they had lost, but on what they could still give to others. They understood now that their father's true legacy wasn't his wealth, his fame, or even his success in the ring. It was his ability to inspire others to do better, to be better. As the Foreman children and Vera sat around the table discussing their next steps, George Jr. looked at his sister and said, "You know, Dad always used to tell us that it's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." Frida smiled. "I think he'd be proud of us. We've taken a lot of hits, but we're still standing and we're doing it together." Vera, who had watched them grow and evolve over the past few months, nodded in agreement. "Your father would be more than proud. He'd be moved by how you've found your own voices, how you've taken his legacy and made it your own. And I know that wherever he is, he's watching over you with pride." The Foreman family had come a long way since the days of division and anger. The past was never going to be forgotten, but it no longer defined them. They had built something new together, a legacy of love, growth, and resilience. The journey that the Foreman family had embarked on since George's passing was one of immense transformation. They had struggled, fought, and even doubted each other at times, but in the end, they had come to realize that their father's legacy wasn't just about the wealth he had built or the fame he had achieved. It was about resilience, love, and the power of family, and they were ready to carry that legacy into the future on their own terms. The George Foreman Foundation had become a beacon of hope for many, but it was more than just charity. It was a reflection of everything George had stood for in life, the importance of giving back, of empowering others, and of making the world a better place for those who came after. With every scholarship awarded, every health initiative launched, and every family brought together around a healthy meal, the Foreman children were creating something that would far outlast the grill or any product their father had left behind. George Jr. and Frida, once at odds and struggling to find their own place within their father's shadow, had become partners in a way they had never imagined. Together, they brought fresh energy to the Foreman Grill brand, modernizing it without losing the heart of what it had always represented: family. They launched a new line of grills, offering more customization options for people who wanted to make cooking a healthier, more personal experience. They also partnered with local chefs to create recipes that could be shared with families all over the world, encouraging a healthier lifestyle. Frida, in particular, found new meaning in her role. Her years in boxing had taught her discipline, strength, and determination. But it was in this new chapter, leading the Foreman Grill brand alongside her brother, that she found true fulfillment. The challenges she had faced growing up in the shadow of her father's greatness were now stepping stones, each one allowing her to carve her own identity and legacy. Frida was no longer just the daughter of George Foreman. She was Frida Foreman, a powerful force in her own right. As for George Jr., the weight of his father's legacy was no longer a burden, it was a responsibility. He had once feared stepping into his father's shoes, unsure if he was worthy of the title of patriarch, but with each passing day, he grew into the role with confidence. His leadership within the family and the business was respected, and more importantly, he had learned how to listen to his sister, to Vera, and most importantly to himself. He knew now that his father's greatest lesson was that family was everything. The business was important, but nothing mattered more than the love and support of those closest to you. Vera, who had always been a trusted confidant of George's, continued to play a key role in the Foreman family's journey. Though she had once been the outsider in many ways, she had now become an integral part of the family's foundation. She offered wisdom and stability, helping to keep things grounded when tensions flared. It was clear that George had not just chosen her as a business partner, but as someone who could help his children navigate the complexities of his empire. And with Vera's continued support, the Foreman family was able to embrace the future with hope and purpose. The family had also decided to honor George's memory in a way that was deeply personal. They chose to build a memorial in their father's name, not just as a tribute to his achievements, but to his philosophy of life. The George Foreman Legacy Park was a place where children, families, and community members could come together to enjoy sports, healthy food, and outdoor activities. It became a symbol of what George had always believed in: the importance of living a balanced life, of taking care of one's health, and of fostering relationships with loved ones. In the opening ceremony of the park, George Jr. stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd of families who had gathered. He could feel his father's presence in the air, as if George was watching proudly from above. "This park isn't just for us," George Jr. said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's for every family, every child, and every person who believes in the power of love, health, and connection. My father taught us that success isn't measured by what you have. It's measured by how you give, how you love, and how you impact the lives of others." Frida, standing beside her brother, added, "This park represents the heart of our family. It's about community. It's about bringing people together, just like Dad did for us. We hope it inspires the next generation to live with purpose, to live with love, and to always remember that family is everything." The ceremony was emotional, and as the ribbon was cut, it marked not just the opening of a physical space, but the opening of a new chapter in the Foreman family's story. The legacy of George Foreman was no longer confined to a brand or a product. It had become a living, breathing thing, a testament to his values, his love for his family, and the way he had touched the lives of so many. As the sun set that evening, the Foreman family stood together, their hearts full, knowing that they had finally found peace. They had embraced their father's legacy, but more importantly, they had created something that was uniquely their own. And with that, they had honored not just the man who had built an empire, but the man who had taught them what it truly meant to be a family. The Foreman family has overcome so much, and now they've transformed their father's legacy into something greater than they ever imagined. What do you think the future holds for them? Will the Foreman family continue to inspire generations to come? Share your thoughts below, and remember to subscribe for more stories of growth, legacy, and the strength of family.